Hi and welcome to this new video in the series on the war in Ukraine. We're going to be looking at the economics of this situation today and focusing in particularly on the blockade and the strategy from the West of punishing Russia. The general narrative in the West obviously is one of Western supremacy. We generally tend to frame any view of the world as us being the champions of democracy, freedom, and whenever we have a military intervention in a country, it's because we want to export democracy. Now, obviously, this is complete and utter bullshit and has, for some reason, been a popular narrative for most of my lifetime. I was raised into this narrative. I watched movies when I was little. We would rent this black big movie box. It was back in the 80s, right? And we'd pick out one propaganda movie from the United States, which is typically what was on the shelf, even though back then we didn't see it that way. Obviously, it was just some exciting narrative. And there was some kind of version of US good, the rest bad, typically. And it was often the red threat, the red scare in the East. By now we know that basically all of the wars waged by the United States in my lifetime they've been complete imperialist interventions that have been conducted mainly to make the military-industrial complex rich and to make favors in the halls and upper echelons of power. There's very little democracy being exported. So I think it's a high time that we just lower our self-perception just a little bit, and we don't have anymore this perception of us being the champions of democracy. Just look at our countries in the West over the last 2 years, basically taking ownership over people's bodies. This is not a sign of a democracy in some kind of golden age, is it? That's not to say that Russia shouldn't aspire to standards of democracy, but the idea that we are in some way morally superior to Russia, we should be a bit careful with that one, I think. A little bit. But anyway, this blockade is meant to hurt Russia. And the question is, who is it really hurting? Because if it was genuinely hurting Russia, then it would make sense for those that are really trying to crush Russia right now to be a fan of it, to be, cheering on for this kind of blockade. And a lot of people, of course, are suffering tremendous financial distress now in their private lives. Gasoline has increased by 30% in my home country of Norway. It's not quite as intense here. Food prices are increasing because obviously Russia and Ukraine are producing tons of food, especially grain. We are looking at a situation in the West of great financial challenge, and we have two currencies primarily in the West, the euro and the US dollar. Of course, there are other currencies as well, but those are the two most powerful ones. And both of them are essentially teetering on the brink of collapse. The US petrodollar is kept up because it's a reserve currency and because there's just a ton of financial trickery. Russia has been preparing for this for a long time. And right now, Russia is in process with the Eurasian countries, with China, of creating alternatives to the Western systems. Now, you may know that Russia has been excluded from the SWIFT system, which is how the international banks communicate with each other. So it becomes harder for Russia to trade and to do transactions with banks abroad. But now you have a Chinese version of that. And the general trend here is of losing Western influence, of a fading American empire. And I don't see a lot of people realize this. They seem to think that we are in a position of strength here. I don't see that. Now, we've heard, obviously, for many years now that the center of power in the world is going to move eastwards towards China, and that there is a big tension between the United States and China. Russia in that conversation is less important. But it's important insofar as this conflict in Ukraine is actually creating a precedence for these systems that China is developing in order to challenge Western supremacy, they are being popularized. The CIPS or chip system is being popularized. And here, of course, Bloomberg, let's see here, let's have a look. Here says why China's payment system can't easily save Russian banks cut off from SWIFT. Western nations have sought to punish Russia for invading Ukraine by imposing economic and financial sanctions and excluding some Russian banks from the omnipresent SWIFT messaging system. Yada, yada, yada. Basically, this whole article indicates that there is still a feeling of Western supremacy in which we cannot believe that there are other systems in the world that may one day come to rival ours. This is incredibly naive. This is so naive as to be borderline insane. So whatever the experts at Bloomberg are thinking, I do not know. But you will see again and again this narrative being repeated that Russia is about to get screwed and we are strong in the West. But is that really what is going on? Say hello to Russian gold and Chinese petro yuan. I don't know the cradle. It just came up when I did a little bit of researching here earlier. But this is pointing to what I'm talking about. The Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union and China just agreed to design the mechanism for an independent financial and monetary system that would bypass dollar transactions. Duh. You think you're going to exclude people from your system and then watch them just paralyze with panic rather than actually be resourceful agents of creating a new system that can bypass the blockade? Is that how ignorant we have become in the West? This is creating a precedence for the shift towards the East. Let's look here. Saudi Arabia considers accepting yuan instead of dollars for Chinese oil sales. Petrodollar towards the petro yuan. This is all happening as a result of this blockade. I don't even know. Now, I've been looking deep down some rabbit holes over the last while, and it's very hard to know who is exactly fighting who. It seems to me like the United States has been experiencing a ton of Chinese influence for a long while. It also seems to me that the sitting administration is doing no favors for the United States and may, in fact, be trying to destroy the United States. You can't just pass all of these trillion-dollar spending bills left, right, and center as if there's no tomorrow and not expect that it's going to result in massive inflation. And of course, this is exactly what's happening. So either people are very ignorant in the halls of power in the United States, or they're maliciously trying to hurt the United States economy. And for what purpose? Is it for the deep state? Is it for China? I don't know. But it seems that if China were to have had a lot of influence over the United States, this kind of thinking that has led to the Russian blockade might actually be designed to help China. Whether it's intentional or not, I have no clue. But what seems to be clear is that the blockade of Russia is hurting the personal finances of Europeans and Americans, and many others too, I'm sure, and looks to be perfectly placed to wreck the Western middle class. While the Western middle class is now in moral outrage about what's happening in Ukraine, meaning that they feel morally obliged to support the blockade against Russia. So there's a catch-22. People's personal conscience is now forcing them to make decisions that is going to potentially cost them their home. Why is it happening? Well, I don't know. But could it be by design? Yes, it could be. See, at the end of the day, what matters is that the Ukrainian population, the citizens of Ukraine, are taken care of, because power games at the upper levels of civilization, so-called civilization, they are ongoing. Boys with toys who haven't done their inner work and they need now to go to war, right? That's a very simplified version of it, obviously, but it's a very valid lens. And so why would you have a blockade against Russia that doesn't help Ukraine, that hurts the West, and that potentially helps Russia? Because the gas prices are going up all over the place. And of course, there's an international market that's not Western, where Russia can export the gas and sell it for much higher prices. And so when I see all of these articles in Western media saying that Russia could be going into recession in so and so many months and could be screwed in so and so many months, I see one finger pointing at Russia and 3 or 4 pointing back at us. I think people are completely losing the plot here, being motivated by moral outrage. I understand that. People are suffering. People are suffering because of a friggin' invasion. It's serious and tragic. But what is actually going to help the cause that we feel in support of, right? This does not seem to be the way. I don't trust much of what I see in Western media, if anything. And I don't exactly know what's going on with this economic blockade. But the consequence, most likely, is that the balance of power is going to move east towards China, that the petrodollar is going to collapse, that the yuan is going to become way more powerful, and that the US empire, as well as the Western hegemony of the markets and the systems in the world, is going to be a thing of the past. And I'll be back in a little while and explore more, maybe the spiritual dimension, or maybe I'll go back to do part 2 of the historical background. And if I didn't already say, I'm doing this experiment now in a training with my teacher called 100 Days of Visibility, which is not these sort of more directed videos where I put up a proper camera in front and stuff like that, but rather it's just a live stream. And I just share what's going on for me at any given moment over 100 days. And if that's interesting to you, then that's going to be streaming into my YouTube channel now over the next several months, actually. Also, this YouTube channel now has officially pivoted away from Reclaiming a Throne towards me, although I remain, of course, the founder of Reclaiming a Throne, and I will keep speaking about it here. So thank you for watching. Thank you for engaging with these difficult topics, where it's so easy to be mired in moral outrage and emotion to the extent that we actually completely lose sight of the well-being of the Ukrainians as well as our own. So I think it's very important that we find a little bit of connection to our rational faculties here and really look at things, investigate them, and ensure that we're not being lied to. Okay, I'll see you next time. Have a great day.